My name is Mary Mates. I am the Business Programs Coordinator at Hennepin County and Hennepin County's point of contact for CEO Next Business Institute. Thank you for joining us for today's CEO Forum, where we are welcoming a new group of CEOs for the 2021 and 2022 year. The CEO Forum is one of 3 lines of service supporting CEOs through CEO Next Business Institute. In addition to today's presentation, CEOs are supported through peer-to-peer learning and individualized research for their businesses. This year, we are welcoming a terrific group of CEOs that are continuing their growth journey and thriving as we come out of a very turbulent last couple of years. So we thank them for growing their businesses in our region and are proud that our region has served second stage businesses with this programming since 2011. The CEO Forum and the program is supported by our community partners, Frederickson and Byron and Insperity. And I'd like to take a moment to have Courtney Thompson from Frederickson and Byron introduce herself.
Great, thanks Mary, and it's nice to see all of you virtually. My name is Courtney Thompson and I am a shareholder at Frederickson and Byron. We're a private practice law firm that specializes in all business matters. Specifically, I work in our Surge group for startup and rapid growth enterprises, where we combine employment attorneys, corporate attorneys, and IP attorneys to provide a full service team to second stage and growing business entities. Happy to be a sponsor again this year and looking forward to meeting all of you, hopefully in person before too long. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you so much, Courtney. As Steve mentioned, CEO Next Business Institute is a regional partnership funded by Hennepin County, Ramsey County, Scott, Carver, and Dakota counties in partnership with the Edward Lowe Foundation. We are pleased today to be welcoming our knowledgeable panelists to talk with us about building value in their businesses. So thank you to our panelists, Patrick Donohue of Hill Capital, Chris Carey of Enthusiast Enterprises, and Bob Brunmeier of OneNet Global. Thank you all for joining us today. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, but we encourage you to type your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. And finally, if you know of a CEO that would benefit from this program, please put them in touch with me. I love talking with CEOs, and we may have some availability to fit someone in this year. So if you know of someone, please connect them up with us. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Patrick.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you, Steve. And I will give a special shout out to Frederickson and Byron, who is our legal counsel and wonderful attorneys there. We work with Brad, Kevin, and a number of people, and know Courtney, and there's the thumbs up. So thank you, everybody, for making the CEO Next Business Institute possible. I am a huge advocate of anything we can do to support entrepreneurs in their journey. And this is a great example of why and how important it is for us to come together to share insights today, because the journey is not easy, but we are going to share insights today to not necessarily make it easy, but to share insights that will help make the journey more efficient. And so we are going to introduce, after a few slides here, our additional panelists, Chris Carey and Bob Brunemeyer. And Chris Carey has recently sold his business, so we can start with the end in mind, and he will be sharing his experiences to share key points of what he learned along the way. And Bob as a past participant in this exact program. So for the next 15 minutes or so, or not 15 minutes, the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to just walk through some slides to share insights with you on what I have seen people do in the journey to creating value. Because at the end of the day, as entrepreneurs, that is what we're all interested in, is building something of value, whether we want to hand it over to the next generation or maybe get to a point where we can sell it and be able to ideally retire comfortably. So again, my name is Patrick Donohue. I am a founder and an investor with Hill Capital Corporation. We invest in small businesses throughout what we like to call the Great Northern Region. And so it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here today. to kick this off, open up your chat function and you can share this if you're comfortable. But how do you think about valuation? How is valuation determined? And as you think about that, the things we're going to talk about for the rest of the day is going to largely impact how you may think about valuation and the things that you may want to think about doing, are doing, or may want to do better to make your business more valuable. So I appreciate this. I'm seeing some answers coming in from reoccurring revenue to people, culture, EBITDA, people, EBITDA, seen that a couple times, a mix of internal and external indicators, innovation, revenue and staff. So thank you, David and Daniel and Elaine, Jill, everybody for contributing. So continue to add to this chat. I'm going to have you do this a couple more times, but this is what's fun. So you can get some actionable takeaways here today for your own purposes. So when I hear people talk about valuation, a lot of times I hear people talking about what a number of people brought up on this chat, and that is they see it as an ability to think about their business as a function of EBITDA. And so let's think about this and also put this in the chat if you're comfortable, but why does value of your business matter? Why would it matter if your business is valuable? I'm guessing a number of you are going to be thinking about this in terms of, well, I'd like to be able to retire someday. And so how do you think about why a valuable business can matter? One of the things that is really important that I have seen over the last 20 years being an investment banker and an investor and an entrepreneur myself is that owning a valuable business can really matter from some very technical aspects to the business, like attracting employees, retaining them, incentivizing them, attracting and retaining better customers. So I'd like to plant a seed with you today that the value of your business can matter a lot more than simply what you might end up with if you have an exit someday or what the free cash flow may be. The ironic part is owning a valuable business can make the journey of entrepreneurship actually a bit easier and more efficient, because it can make it easier to attract and retain people and clients and so forth. And so with those seeds I've planted, I've been writing a book for the last year since the pandemic started. It's due out in the second quarter, and I'd be happy to share a free copy with everyone on this event today, and we'll make a note of that to be able to do that for you. In that book, we talk a lot about what are the real drivers of value, because the business that you own and are building is more than an EBITDA multiple. And at the end of the day, it is hard to control an EBITDA multiple. There are certain things you can do. And so we help in the book outline what are value drivers, real value drivers on things that you can control. And so today is not the format to go into all those details, but I'm going to highlight 3 of them for you as a preview and an introduction to our additional panelists today. First and foremost, vivid vision. If you're like me, you've seen in the news where it's always that visionary entrepreneur that seems to get the big valuation or raise a lot of money. They have a vision of having electric vehicles on the roadways throughout the world, or they have a vision of everybody using a certain application or a piece of technology. And I've seen that happen a number of times where that vision can really lead to attracting capital and attracting really large valuations to businesses. But it even goes beyond that. Vision is about a growth mindset and looking at how is a business going to be built. And okay, it's one thing to have the big, hairy, audacious goal, but it's a whole nother to help to really have that view of the future and to be able to articulate it and to help people get there and to understand why that future is achievable. And so that vivid vision is really important for entrepreneurs as they're thinking about building value in their business. And then I've also come to appreciate there's this idea of innovate or die. A business needs to grow and always be thinking about growth. Otherwise, the opposite will happen. And at a minimum, the business will atrophy. So that vision of what the business is looking to achieve is super important. That's the first seed I'd like to plant here today. The second seed I want to plant is on corporate development, which is an umbrella term that I utilize to talk about a few key things that a business owner can do and that they can control. First and foremost is to treat the business as if it is always for sale. And that mindset and that mental framework of thinking about the business as always being for sale will naturally lead to some really good habits of making sure that the business is understandable, that is properly capitalized, that it understands where it may be able to make acquisitions itself, or understanding what are the drivers of value of why somebody would want to buy the business. I touched upon something there in that idea of corporate development and capital formation that is super important. A lot of times business owners will not fully appreciate in the early days how much money a business will need and consume, especially for any business models that have inventory or accounts receivable. Those business models utilize a lot of cash. And so the idea of being able to raise money and have relationships with bankers and investors is super important, because at the end of the day, it is all about capitalizing that growth plan for the vivid vision, to being able to make sure that the business has enough cash and cushion to be able to go out there and to do the things that it needs to test out sales and marketing and new products and product extensions. The third seed I want to plant with you today on controlling value drivers is the idea of business design. And if I had to bundle up CEO Nexus Business Institute into a package, I would talk a lot about business design, because at the end of the day, that is the value of being able to network with your peers and to be able to share insights, because it's the ability to think about where and how you're doing things within the business and working on the business to make sure it's building value for you, your family, your employees, your shareholders. And with that business design, a couple of the key things that I think about are operating systems. You talk a lot about, or will be talking a lot about, the entrepreneurial operating system in the book Traction, or there's other systems out there as well that like OKRs and so forth, or different metrics. Whatever those operating systems are is part of that business design. There's also the talk about elevating and delegating, and that idea of professional management. And then finally, the idea of optimizing cash flow and really working on the economic engine of the business to say, okay, if $1 goes in for an investment, how am I going to personally get $3, $4, $5, $10, or $100 back out of that investment in growth and being able to optimize that long term? So there's a lot to unpack here, but today it's all about inspiring you and starting with the end in mind in what you're going to be experiencing with the CEO Nexus Business Institute. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our panelists, and we are going to start with our friend Chris Carey. And hold on, Chris, I'm going to pull up the next slide. I'll hand it over to Chris, but as Chris and Bob are introducing their stories, I want you to be thinking about how will valuation be determined? What will you be doing through the next several weeks and months with CEO Nexus in the Business Institute on building value, and how will valuation be determined if and when your business brings in outside investors or gets bought someday? And so with that, I am going to hand it over to my friend and fellow entrepreneur, Chris Carey. to share his experience in building his business. Chris?
Hey, thanks, Patrick. And thanks for having me here today to share a little bit about my story. Happy to do so. I'll dive right in and share a little bit about the history of my business. My business was called Modern Automotive Performance, and it was launched in 2006. We sold automotive performance parts online. So essentially anything that would make your vehicle accelerate faster, turn faster, or stop faster. And it was focused on a very niche set of vehicles. And that was an approach we took moving forward, was to essentially be a big fish in a small pond and try and be the one-stop shop for anybody that owned a set of particular vehicles, namely Mitsubishi, Eclipse, Subaru WRX, and STI, and a couple of other vehicle platforms that were certainly inspired by the Fast and the Furious movie franchise. So I always give a tip of my hat to that movie franchise. But in 2006, prior to that, I was actually working full-time at Verizon Wireless, and I don't exactly recall what the catalyst was for me to decide that I wanted to start a business. I didn't actually know any other business owners. I just knew that I didn't enjoy working for the man anymore. We had these 6 a.m. meetings that were disciplinary, and I just am not a morning person. So that was part of the catalyst to kind of have me start looking for another solution and what I was going to do with my life, and decided I was either going to start a third-party wireless phone retailer, or my hobby, my passion at the time was automotive performance, and that just simply had a lower barrier of entry. So I was able to have a friend of mine build me a basic website and put some inventory actually in my bedroom closet of my townhouse, and things kind of took off from there. But I really had no idea what I was getting into. So we began by signing a lease in Plymouth, Minnesota in 2006 for, I think it was just over $2,000 a month, a 60-month term. And so naive at the time, I really had no idea what would have happened had this not been successful, and what I was essentially putting myself on the hook for. But fortunately, things worked out, and we found some traction. And I was able to come on full-time in February of 2007. I forgot to mention I started this with a co-founder of mine who was, I'm the computer guy. I like to sit in front of a computer. I can do sales and marketing. He was the gearhead. So he was the guy working on the vehicles and essentially helped get the business off the ground while I was continuing to support my family and my expenses while working at Verizon Wireless until February of 2007. But then we, as I mentioned earlier, found some traction and experienced a significant period of growth. In 2007, we did $965,000, I believe. And by 2010, we had done 9.6 million. So that landed us on the Inc. 500 in 2010 with 7 other Minnesota-based companies. The early strategy wasn't much more than providing exceptional customer service. That was something I had learned in the consumer electronics industry prior to my venture into entrepreneurship. And there was no paid advertising for us at that point in time. Any extra funds, any profits were being funneled back into the business. We were growing staff rapidly and expanding into larger and larger spaces within this industrial park in Plymouth. After that significant period of growth through 2010, we actually plateaued at about $10 million in revenue. And that lasted for several years, which was an extremely frustrating period in my entrepreneurial journey. So moving on from there, I'll talk a little bit about what worked for us to kind of come out of that frustrating period, that plateau. So for some reason, and again, I don't know the catalyst here, just luck, I guess, I decided to reach out to all of the other companies, Minnesota-based companies that were on the Inc. 500 at the time. I believe I alluded to it earlier. There's 7 of them. I got a response from 2 and ended up meeting up with one of those entrepreneurs, Andrew Donohue, another Minnesota-based company out of Golden Valley. Bulk Reef Supply was his business. And we got to know each other pretty well, had lunches occasionally. And one day I found the gumption to ask him, as I knew he had not only met that $10 million threshold, but continued to grow past it, what he attributed his ongoing success to. And he shared with me 2 concepts, 2 systems. The first of which being a local organization called Entrepreneurs Organization, and just simply conveyed how much value he had gotten from a peer group and being able to learn from other entrepreneurs, learn from their mistakes, their failures, without having to simply make them on my own, which took a lot longer in terms of time and was significantly more costly in terms of financial impact. The second that he shared was a system called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, based on a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And it's just a simple set of systems and tools to run any kind of business. But the vast majority of those concepts were things that were completely foreign to me in the first 8 years of running my business, whether it was a scorecard with KPIs that was tracked on a weekly basis, or setting quarterly and annual goals for my organization, or crafting a vivid vision, as Patrick alluded to in his presentation a bit earlier, and essentially knowing where we were going with the organization so that I could get my entire team rowing in that same direction. A third thing I want to mention in terms of what works for us is a system for budgeting and forecasting. We used a template called an annual operating plan that was introduced by a third-party controller that we had engaged with at the time. And what I've found from the first time that we put together a forecast or a budget for the next year, and essentially every year since then, is that when things get put on paper or digitally in a spreadsheet, the likelihood of them happening seems to increase markedly. So not to say that we can just throw numbers on there and it's going to magically happen, but once everybody understands what the goal is and how we're going to get there, what the revenue is going to look like, the margin, the overhead, and then you can formulate a plan for all aspects of the organization to follow. And that proved to be very beneficial for us moving forward. And then lastly, I want to touch on, I'm a big fan of Jim Collins and the book Good to Great. So at some point between years 8 and 10, I believe, we had to, after reading the book, we had to make a pretty tough decision if we wanted to focus on what we could be the best in the world at. And that for us was e-commerce as it pertains to automotive performance parts. And so we essentially stopped offering the installation and repair services that we had been doing for that nearly first decade of our existence. And seemed like a huge decision at the time, and it was, and our customers weren't happy about it, at least the local ones. But that allowed us to focus on being the best in the world as an e-commerce entity and really investing all of our resources and working to succeed there. So those are the things that I wanted to touch on in terms of what worked for us. Jumping further or into the future here into 2020, which is when I decided to, or ultimately did, sell the business. Why did I decide to sell the business? So I guess for me specifically, there were some industry trends, namely a shift to electric vehicles that was a concern to me. Not to say that my team isn't capable or wouldn't be capable of shifting and embracing that trend and offering performance products for electric vehicles, but was that the challenge that I wanted to spend the next 5 years of my life on? And knowing that it was going to be a challenge, has the business reached its peak valuation? And so those were things that were kind of looming in the back of my head. In addition to that, we had some changes in terms of the enterprise and what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. We were up to, I think, about 80 employees and almost 43 million in revenue at the end of 2020. And most of my time was spent managing a very large human resources system, whether it was hiring, firing, review, recognize, reward. It was all about people. And that was just not something that I thoroughly enjoyed. And it was taking my focus and energy off of the things, whether it was strategic planning or that more visionary, big picture thinking. I wasn't able to do that as much as I would have liked to. And then another facet would be financial security. And I think that, that's a motivating factor for many people that are looking to exit their business at some point. But the vast majority of my wealth had been tied up in the business. And just for the sake of my family and the future and the unknowns, wanted to, have that financial security, that nest egg kind of set aside. And then lastly, I just want to talk about freedom. This was 15 years of my life, and I wanted to have the freedom to explore new opportunities, discover my purpose, and ultimately make a greater impact on the world. I felt pretty good creating 80 plus jobs in Minnesota here and all the economic stimulus that I'm sure, as a result of those jobs and that organization. But I think there's something, perhaps greater for me out there, and I'm excited to continue to explore that and in the next year here. Last thing I wanted to touch on here, I think I'm running a little bit low on time, is what did we do to increase enterprise value? So when we talk about, thinking about selling, what are some of the things that someone should be considering as they're continuing to build their business and move towards potential exit in the future? One of my biggest suggestions is to leverage someone, in terms of an advisor on the M&A front. We used a local company called Madeira Partners, and the value that someone like that brings to the table in terms of how to sell your business, how to do it well, how to finish big, and extract the most value from the organization was paramount. I was actually working with Jake from Madeira Partners beginning in, I want to say, April of 2019. It might have even been earlier than that when I started the conversation with him to start to talk about valuation and the things that I would need to do to get to, the goals that I had in terms of the finances in terms of the exit. So essentially in April, that I was told that the finances weren't going to make sense and that the multiple and EBITDA would not yield what I was looking for in terms of the exit. And so essentially I made the decision to put my head back down and just go back to work. And, now having a good sense of where I was trying to go. And that was another thing that Jake and Madeira Partners was able to help me understand, was the valuation sweet spots, so to speak. So for instance, $2 million in EBITDA changes the profile of a potential buyer that would be looking to acquire a business. And that would also allow him to position the company in a way that we would have potentially competing bidders and multiple entities that were interested in buying the business, which would obviously, again, serve to bolster the valuation. So understanding those sweet spots, knowing that I wasn't yet there, allowed me to kind of put my head back down, work to improve revenue, work to improve profitability, keep overhead in check, and really just improve the valuation of the business for a solid 2 years before we were ultimately to exit. Another important part when it came time to going into an LOI process and working with ultimately the company that decided to purchase the business, having some sort of an operating system. I alluded to EOS earlier. We also have incorporated several aspects of scaling up, the 3HAG way, and also OKRs. There's a great book, Measure What Matters, by John Doerr, that talks about how companies like Google and Facebook and some Silicon Valley some of the big Silicon Valley names are using objectives and key results. And we have essentially our own proprietary operating system now that has little facets of each of those systems that we found to be of value. But having those tools, having a scorecard, an accountability chart, goals, a vivid vision, and able to present that information to a potential buyer was, they were surprised, to say the least, to see us with that level of organization in comparison to the other potential acquisition targets that they had looked at. Additionally, having our financial house in order enabled us to close in roughly 75 days. So anything you can do to keep your income statement, your balance sheet sorted out along the way throughout this journey is going to be extremely beneficial when it comes down to the due diligence process after signing an LOI and working towards a close, and make sure there's no surprises along the way. And the last thing I have for you is really just a book recommendation. If anybody is at the stage of thinking of exiting their business, I know I talked a lot about how to improve the valuation of your business here and some of the things that work for us, but as entrepreneurs, working towards that exit is, paramount. That's the end goal for a lot of individuals. And there's a lot of different facets of exiting a business that people just don't factor in, namely structure, meaning, and identity. You lose the structure of your day after you sell your business. Is your meaning tied up in your business? Is your identity tied up in your business based on the community that you have there and the camaraderie with your staff? And at some point, you're not going to see those people anymore. So a lot of things to think about as you're looking towards exiting, not only, increasing enterprise value and extracting the most from a financial perspective, but what are you going to do with yourself, after you do exit? So that book recommendation is called Finish Big by Bo Burlingham. And anybody that I encounter that's looking to exit their business, that's always my first recommendation. So I think I'm over time here. Hopefully what I've shared with you provided some value. And again, thanks for having me.
Chris, that was hugely impactful in 12 minutes, and I've known you for a few years now, and I learned a ton in just a few minutes. It's super cool. What a wonderful story you have, and thank you for being here today to share it with everyone. And by the way, there's several people in the chat that are asking for some of the things that you've brought up here. So as we have time, we may want to pop into that chat and share some of that links and so forth with people. Next up is Bob Brunmeier, and Bob is a past participant of the CEO Nexus Business Institute, and Bob's business is OneNet Global, and he is going to share his experiences with the CEO Nexus Business Institute and how to maximize your value of this program. So with that, the floor is yours, Bob.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to Steve for inviting me. I'm thrilled, like the other panel members. I'm honored to be here and get a chance to share my story. Thank you, Mary, for sponsoring our organization in the CEO Next and CEO Nexus program. And I thought I'd start with one is the loneliest number. It kind of came to my mind. I was at a ADP leadership conference, and I met some other CEOs there, which was wonderful. And a woman, that one of the speakers, she said, you know, it's really kind of lonely being at the top. And I didn't quite understand what she meant. I was so surprised at her candor, quite frankly. And it did make sense to me at one point, as I thought about that oftentimes CEOs and founders, just by very nature, you have a hierarchical organization. Somebody has to be the decision maker. We have a good management team, et cetera. But being at the top sometimes can be lonely, and who else do you talk to? So for me, being part of the organization, having it made sense with being the loneliest, the top person can be the loneliest person in the company. Sometimes you inside the company, you can't talk to others about critical decisions, challenges you might be having, things that might just not be fit for employees or others. And so it's really been helpful for me to be able to participate in the program and share some difficult decisions to make or challenging decisions. Chris talked about some of those things too, getting, you know, some of the things we didn't have a lot of structure to. And we've learned a lot in the short span of time that we've been in the organization. So officially I'm an alumni now, just as of a little bit ago. But also came to my mind with the peer group, which I really like. The farmer's ad kind of stuck in my brain. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. And no matter what I thought I was seeing, you know, we're a relatively small company, I think, you know, 35 people and growing. We've been in the Fast 50 the last 4 years in a row, you know, growing very fast. And that's great, but it feels you get a little, you know, head down and just working every day. And sometimes it's nice to be able to step back and know, hey, somebody else has dealt with a difficult employee or HR matters, or should we do an acquisition or not, or where should I go get funding, or how much debt should we take on? Some real critical decisions that's not just an everyday conversation for your management team necessarily. At least it wasn't for me. So the peer group has been helpful to have that level of experience. When I first started my company, I had a couple partners that I ended up buying out. And one thing that always made sense to me is one of our partners was, you know, people, there's either people act like an employee or act like an owner. And that's not pejorative. It's just, that's what it is. And I couldn't really expect employees to take on questions and challenges or dilemmas like they own the company, because they didn't. So the peer group has been a place for me to go. It's been very helpful. And some of the things I'm going to talk about here that are going to tie back into Patrick and Chris's conversation, things I've learned in the group, but also add value to our organization. So I'll get there in a second. I mentioned we're a fast growing company. We came together, Greg and I, my business partner, we came together in 2012, I guess legally in 2013. And we're about $1 million company. Now we're a $10 million company. And looking at 2 acquisitions that would make us about a $15 million company. And then once we're we're onto that track, we realized via some metrics that we learned about that we want to kind of go to the next level. I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the things that we realized growing that fast was, and some of you might have, this is one of those challenges you face with some great employees when you're, 6 people, 8 people, 10 people, but now you're 35 people and growing very rapidly. We're recruiting almost all the time right now. And what that means is that you get to that uncomfortable spot where perhaps the company actually outgrew some of the people we had or have. Even still, we look closely at strength finders, DISC, and what it used to be called divine assessments, but now it's called Outmatch. We use those assessments, but what we were trying to find is people's strengths. And as the company grew very quickly, we've moved people into other parts of the company, so that we thought that was a critical realization that the organization had literally outgrown their expertise. We didn't want to have them leave because they had a lot of intellectual sort of history with us, a lot of knowledge within the organization about us. And so we didn't want them to leave, but what do you do with them? So that was pretty tough for us because, we didn't, you don't want to have that kind of seemingly at the time uncomfortable conversation about where do you fit in best, because it clearly wasn't what they had been doing. One of the areas using the 3 legs of the stool, operations, sales, and finance, we realized Greg was great at operations. He's a great technician. We do managed IT and managed security. So anything related to computers and phones. He was great at all that. And I was great at sales, but we were the weakest at the finance component. And we made a major acquisition in 2019. And one of the coolest things we got with that, of course, customers and revenue, we got 12 solid people that are still with us 2.5 years later. And one of those is our controller, and really stabilized our financial piece. And you heard that from Chris and Patrick in a couple of different ways, but we really needed to shore up our financial side. We were, it was way too loosey-goosey. We were not managing metrics. We weren't keeping an eye on things. It's great when you're growing, kind of solves a lot of problems, but we were probably losing money that we shouldn't have. Well, we know we were losing money that we shouldn't have. So a couple of things that I think are perfect for this conversation, adding value, but for us, we just wanted to make the company better at the beginning. Yes, we have an exit strategy, we have a 5-year plan, but while that's going along, like Chris mentioned, we weren't where we wanted to be with our value. So Greg and I have put our head down. Some things that we've learned about from the group specifically was EOS. That was new language to me anyway, maybe common knowledge to a lot of you all. I didn't even know what EOS stood for, Entrepreneurial Operating System. And now we have a little tidbit of traction going on in our organization. But like Chris also mentioned, take what you want, leave the rest. There's multiple EOSs out there, systems that are great. But I think any of us that have been exposed to those systems of decision-making, what are your big goals? What can you actually get done in a span of time? Holding people accountable. It's invaluable to the organization that can drill you to do it. And I learned about that through the CEO Nexus group. So I'm very thankful for that. One of the things we had a speaker, as you all will see, is Steve does a great job getting some fantastic speakers. One of the people worked for Warren Buffett with Edina Realty, and she helped do all the acquisitions that grew them up to one of the largest national real estate brokerages in the country. But she said we were looking for businesses to buy that had professional management. And I didn't really know what she meant. I mean, obviously you know what the 2 words mean, but she said, well, how do you define that? Well, and you heard that a little bit from Chris, Patrick, and my story was that one of the things we've done is looked at people's strengths. We looked at where they're really good. And you know what? If they're bad at something, get them out of that. We had somebody that was great at HR and events and things like that, and not so good at finance. So we just moved her out of finance completely. Just doesn't touch her, that kind of thing. And she loves it. So those are just, so we looked at people's strengths and moved them there. And we've now have 6 people on our management team, including the 2 owners. And we've gone on I'll say rigorous or conscientious, intentional plan to train those folks. So we have a professional development plan for each of our employees. And one of the reasons we might consider another acquisition as an example is to acquire some more key professional management individuals. So professional management is having a structure, having an EOS, having goals, having written down, be held accountable to those. So that's what it's meant to us. And we've come a long way just in the last 8 months since I've been a participant in this CEO group. So I'm thrilled about that. Now I have a much better understanding through the group of what professional management really is. And we'll define it for ourselves as you all can for your companies, but it's really been eye-opening for simple things like people know what the goals are of the company and where we headed. That may sound obvious, but if you don't communicate that out, it's hard for everybody to know. Another speaker that really resonated with me, I'm a spreadsheet guy. I love spreadsheets. My first computer, Apple IIc, was Lotus 123 spreadsheet. It was like the killer app. I loved spreadsheets and metrics. But this gentleman had a manufacturing company and he sold it. And Steve had him speak to us. But his mantra was sort of, I misspelled measure, but it should be measure. I'm sure you figured that out by now. But he said, measure everything. And certainly not maybe everything, but at least what's the important KPIs for your organization. So decide what those are. We have 6, actually, not 6. 6. But we have 6 metrics that our management team watches on a weekly basis. And it's really been helpful for them to understand if there's a problem, we can dig down into those key performance indices, those KPIs, and say, what are we missing, or what's broken, what process is broken, et cetera. Another thing as a fast-growing company we use metrics for is to forecast we have a trajectory, we look out into the future, and we know when to be hiring. So we think that's important. We don't want to be caught off guard and be ready for our growth. So that's been important. And another thing I heard, and you've heard it a few times today, we've made decisions. One of the things that was really important to our clients, we learned through Good to Great and the Flywheel. It's another great book. Chris mentioned it. Love the whole flywheel notion. One of the things we realized with our flywheel, we took a whole weekend off site to go do a leadership meeting. I would recommend that. We came up with our flywheel. Now, one of those things was in our industry, billing is a big deal, telecom. And so we invested heavily in a new billing platform. And there's CRM and some other cool things about that. But it was a big decision to make. Multi-hundreds of thousands of dollars for the software and then people to run it and all the entering data. But what we realized was that made our company more valuable. It was a big decision. We made a decision like somebody's going to want that when they see it, type of thing. So one of the things I heard in one of the speakers was make decisions like your company is for sale. Maybe that's obvious, but it helped us anyway deal with the risk that associated with some of those decisions. Like, wow, there's a lot of money for a small company. And so we did it because we realized it was going to further our flywheel. And it's why people buy from us, because our bill is, we take all of our providers, we have over 200 providers, we put them on one single bill. That's one of our secret sauces. Our customers love that. As a matter of fact, we've won business just because we simplified the billing. Well, that was a big investment for us, but it's part of our flywheel. So you can kind of see the thought process there. Now, when we did that, we started that process in late 2018. Our business wasn't for sale. We realized it wasn't at the value we wanted it to be, like Chris mentioned. And then we made that decision, and now we've grown substantially since then. We're about 50% bigger than we were in 2018. And guess what? It's furthering our flywheel and furthering our value. So the ROI is not only there for us while we build the business, but it certainly will be there for a potential buyer. So make decisions along the way might help moderate the risk diving into the swimming pool of risk. If you can see that, hey, this is really going to add value in something that somebody is going to want in your respective businesses. So those are some things that for me, specifically, I gained some insight and knowledge from the group. And one last insight one is the loneliness number. especially in the Zoom format. I'm an in-person guy. I'm a little older. I used to have a lot more hair. It's a little harder to make that connection and sort of trust each other in just a virtual setting. So I would say fearlessly reach out to your peers inside your groups. I think it's really helpful, as you've heard several different ways here today from the panel. It might be a little scary to just ask somebody a really open-ended question about, does this person still fit in our organization, or what do you do to have an exit for a person? Some stuff that's really hard to do sometimes, but it really helped us go through that process within the peer group. So do fearlessly reach out to your peers, so you know that you're not alone, and somebody else like Farmers is probably knows the very thing you're about to undergo. So I would challenge you or cajole you to reach out to your fellow members in your groups. And thanks again for having me, Steve and Mary. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, thanks for your contribution over the last year, and you're not going away here. We got questions both from the group, and then I want to tee things up before we go to the entire panel. Bob, you were giving some great examples around the peer group and around the guest speakers through the forum dialogue, but I'd like you also to comment on the SIG research, how you were able to leverage the virtual research team to solve problems or advance your business as well, because we've got in the audience new members of the new class, and they're trying to figure out what's ahead and then how to maximize this experience.
Yeah, thank you for that follow-on question, Steve. And SIG for us was, on the sales side, and we had a couple key challenges. We were trying to reach out. We wanted to clarify our persona, like who our buyer is exactly. We did that through some research. And we actually purchased some lists with another key contact we had that does GIS. They go out and scrub all the databases like Dun & Bradstreet and help us get that list, which was fantastic. And then with sales leadership, we were looking for some structure around sales leadership, and we had some guidance around that. So these are some really smart people. I will say, much like Get Engaged, I mentioned challenge you to throw some things out to your peer group, but also the sales, for us, the SIG was sales side of the organization. And we did have to own that. We had to make it our own in order to get the most value out of it. They may not just come to you as much, but if you take challenges, questions to them, how can we increase sales in our persona? They will help you. They were great to see us through increasing our sales that way. So, but you do have to, I would recommend maybe get one of your sales, for us, it was get a marketing and sales leader in our organization involved in that, so they could engage directly and get right to the ground level of not just an idea, but taking their persona, putting it into our marketing automation machine, our software, making it create some leads and opportunities. So we really went all the way into it. So, okay. And it was of value there. Thanks.
All right. So before I open it up, and those that have posted questions, I'm going to ask you to unmute here, and so that you can ask directly. But let's start with Patrick. You set the stage with this vivid vision, and what is valuation? How do I apply it? Based on now Chris's comments and Bob's comments, is there something you might do to punctuate or distill that what was covered here in sort of in a nutshell, so we get the best takeaway from you?
Yeah, I think the nutshell is really bringing it all together and tying it all together. So, for example, utilizing the entrepreneurial operating system or scaling up or whatever your system is, but the metrics that Bob and Chris had talked about, but tying near-term steps to the things that are going to lay the foundation to ultimately achieving that vivid vision, that long-term. And if you want to exit the business someday, there's certain steps you're going to want to take. If you want to create a family business, there may be certain other steps, but it's always about tying it to your near-term metrics and what you're doing today.
Gotcha. And Chris, you had mentioned the book Finish Big by Bo. That's a great book. One of the takeaways from that book, and I wonder how it might have tracked for you, is a surprising number of successful financial sales do not result in satisfied sellers, meaning there are a lot of owners that go through exactly what you went through, and they get to the other end and they haven't prepared for that next chapter, having lived it. Is there something about that journey you could tell us about so that we're not surprised like many people are?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I believe I was well prepared. And I know there's a lot of people that go into this maybe blind and they don't know what's coming. I did, because I read that book and several others, did have some idea what to expect. But it is interesting. I'm in the middle of a 2-year transition period now with the acquiring company where, you know, the task was for me to ensure a smooth transition and then hire a successor. I've now done that, and there's very little need for me anymore. And yet I don't feel like I'm set to move into whatever my next chapter is, not to mention I don't necessarily know what my next chapter is. So it's a weird feeling of floating right now. And I'm a very goal-oriented person, and until a few days ago, I didn't have any goals for myself personally that I was working towards. And that was just a very weird feeling for me. So I heard an analogy recently from someone that was actually in the peer group I mentioned in my forum. And he mentioned and I can't repeat the story, but I feel as if I'm in a period of my life where I'm sharpening my axe. And so I'm not actively looking for the next tree that I'm going to chop down, and I'm not in the act of doing that, but I'm sharpening my axe. So I'm expanding my network, I'm expanding my knowledge and my skills to take on whatever that next challenge might be. But the other thing that I was going to mention, beyond just financial security and the financial components of an acquisition, the big thing for me was my employees. I was really prided myself on the culture that we created over the last, the 15 years that we were in business. And I wanted to make sure that my employees were taken care of, and that I've crossed my T's and dotted my I's in that regard. And for us, the company that acquired us is growing even quicker than we were. My entire team was retained, and we've been adding people. I think the last I checked, they were up to 115 people in our division of this now larger company. So that's another thing. What is the intention of the acquiring company in terms of the employees? Are they going to let some people go? Are they planning to keep people? And then if you're thinking about selling to private equity, knowing full well that they're looking to probably sell again in some 5 to 7 year period of time. And then even if you get comfortable with what they're going to do with your employees and your culture, what's going to happen 5 to 7 years from that point? So I employed a significant amount of friends and family, and even more than the financial aspect of the acquisition, it was really what was going to happen to the employees and the culture that I spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about.
Great. All right. So there's never enough time when we have access to such insight and wisdom here. So I apologize, but I've asked people to unmute, bring on your camera. Let's ask a few questions. We are going to have to wrap close to 1 because we have the group that queues up soon after. But any questions you want to ask directly to Chris or to Bob or to Patrick? Speak up. Well, I have a question for Chris. In the example, we said that inflection point when they changed their business model to all in on e-commerce, risk reward, ROI. So this is one of the times we can get inside the mind and the experience of the owner that's done it successfully. How did that feel? How did you make the gut check call? And then did it happen overnight, or did you have a period of uncertainty, or sort of what was that like as an owner making a burn the ships kind of decision?
It was really difficult, and I'll be honest. My brother is also my marketing director, and he had to continue to push me to make that decision. It's easy to read something in a book and be like, oh, this is probably in their best interest, but to actually make the decision, because it resulted in us having to lay off a couple people that worked in the service side of the business, which was the last thing that I wanted to do. Additionally, our local customers really enjoyed that service offering, but it was a single-digit percentage of our revenue that created 80% of my headaches. So now when I look back, there's the old adage, hire slow, fire fast. Well, everybody knows that you should hire slow and fire fast. I think I've yet to meet anybody that actually does that really successfully. So in this situation, it's easy to look back and say, we should have stopped doing that a long time ago. But when there's customers that are going to be upset, when there's employees that are going to lose their jobs, it's a lot more difficult to make that decision. And I kind of drug my feet a little bit, but ultimately it was one of the best decisions we ever made, because it allowed us to focus on that core component of our business and really focus on being great at e-commerce.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yes.
You kind of had mentioned about levels of EBITDA and levels of companies, kind of like where you get more bidders and stuff like that. Is there a kind of a quick pyramid that you guys kind of know on where they kind of where the hits are on that?
Patrick has some more insight here. I can share. There's two things that I'm aware of there. One, when your business is at an earlier stage and you have a lower amount of EBITDA, the potential buyer that you might be looking for would be an owner operator. So someone that's going to step in and take your place and actually run the business. And in that situation, you would use something called seller discretionary earnings and actually add back owner's compensation when you're calculating valuation and multiple. When you grow to a size larger than that and you get into $1 million plus EBITDA or $2 million plus EBITDA, it's probably going to be, if not for me, it ended up being a strategic acquirer, but also we talked to several private equity firms and they have no interest in stepping in and running the business. They just want to serve kind of as a board and direct from there. But Patrick, do you have any insights on different levels and different types of buyers?
Whoop, sound.
Oh, hey, so sorry about that. I love that answer, Chris, because that's exactly how I think about it. There's the strategic buyers like other companies, there's individual buyers, and then there's private equity. And a lot of us are hearing and seeing private equity in the news, but the vast majority of transactions are individuals and or strategic buyers.
And I know this is the first of a series of meetings for the rest of the program. And we're starting with a stretch goal of like, we need to start thinking differently and have the end in mind. And we've got two great examples or several great examples that we're listening to. But the whole purpose of our program is to set you up for that future success, whatever that may be. And part of what I'm hearing is you got to change your mindset now to be prepared for that. Now, there's a powerful book. Carol Dweck is the author, Stanford professor on mindset, the new formula for success. I don't know if that was what you were referencing, Patrick, but that growth mindset is foundational to innovation and foundational to looking ahead and solving for the future. Is there something you might want to add about that?
No, actually, it is Carol's work that a lot of that idea came from, because I've seen her. I'm reading another book right now that is quoting her work quite a bit, but it is that growth mindset, because it is either the growth, what I've come to find too, and a lot of people talk about, it's either you have a growth mindset or your default is atrophy. There is no like hold fast status quo. That thing doesn't exist in business. You're either growing or you're going backwards.
And the beauty of it. The beauty, based on her work, is that you can cultivate it. You can adopt and develop your growth mindset, which is intrinsic to innovation and to entrepreneurship, but that's a good source.
Exactly. There's actually a local author that just published a book here that talks a lot about that, but it's there's a lot of studies on athletes and so forth, but the idea in popular media that people are born with certain gifts, the research actually finds that it's the people who practice the most, spend the time practicing, learning, so on and so forth, that do well. There is no inherent talent in being an entrepreneur. It's all about the grit and determination to learn and to build.
Yeah. So, to tie it back, and then we're going to have to close here, but I would imagine, Chris and Bob, the entrepreneur you are today is so vastly different. And through the practice and the experience and all the peer exposure, is that you could scale up that next business faster, more efficiently, more effectively than you could have before, because you have evolved as a leader. Do you feel that? Like, what's your take on your growth mindset based on your journey?
Well, for me, it's been 26 years. I'm a little slower than most, I guess. I don't know. Chris did it in half the time. I think of the one thing I like triathlons and long distance stuff. I have more grit than intelligence or luck or anything. I just grind it out. So good or bad, stick with it. But this type of group, I wish I had found it sooner. I will say that, because it does accelerate your growth. It just does.
All right, great close. I want to invite Chris. Did you have a comment?
I would say I echo that sentiment. I often wonder how much larger would the enterprise have gotten? How much quicker would I have grown had I found, a peer group like EO or like this one, and an operating system like EOS 3 years or 4 years in instead of 8? And I think it would have been astronomical. So, if you're in the earlier stages of your business and you're hearing these things for the first time, this was the secret sauce. These are the things that helped me find success, and I can't recommend them enough. So.
Okay, so with that, Mary, we're going to ask you for some closing comments, and for the roundtable group that meets immediately after, I'd ask you to log out of this meeting and then find the other link in another email and log into that meeting, and then I'll be there shortly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you to our panelists. And on behalf of the Regional Partnership for CEO Next Business Institute, I really thank the entrepreneurs that have committed the time to being here and participating in this group this year. I hope you have a wonderful experience. Myself and the contacts you see listed on the screen related to your county are available to hear your feedback and really just to connect with you if that's something you'd like. So thank you to everyone that helped put this program together, and let's not forget Steve Quello, our facilitator. So thanks to all of you.